Okay, so I will just need a second to
Sure thing.
remove. Yes. Add.
I may at some point during this have to do an intermission to use the bathroom because ours is being repaired, so
Yeah.
I'll let you know. I'm making a bad decision drinking coffee.
I can imagine. Okay, yeah, I just made some coffee right now. I finished it so that
Ooh.
you don't have to blah blah blah. Okay, window capture. Create new.
I do know that actually I'll have to take this off because there's a lot of ambient noise. From when I did that podcast, I found out some cool things. So one was don't wear a jacket with that noise. Ever.
Yes, that's true. Okay. Messenger call.
You always have to make sure the hair is stellar.
Yes. I mean, if not, why even have hair? You know?
Exactly.
How do I am lost. If this wasn't Mac, this would be so much easier. Oh, my hair. Look at that. Okay. Yeah, so now I have one mason and a small Martin. Let's see if you can. I just thought there's like this watch together thing where you can watch YouTube videos at the same time and stuff.
Yeah, like the watch party. Really fun.
Oh yeah, you can do that later sometime.
That would actually be kind of fun, and then we could live stream that if that's possible. I don't know the technology aspect of it, but and then we could like comment on the video.
Screen.
Actually, do you follow? I'm trying to do like less Instagram, but occasionally I'll get on because it just necessitates it. Do you follow the Honest Youth Pastor account?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's funny. He does like sermon reviews, which are really entertaining. Not from like a funny perspective, but just from a kind of diagnostic perspective. He's like, all right, like he'll just take kind of like well-known pastors and then their sermons and kind of be like, all right, this guy's borderline heresy right here. or this guy's doing like a great thing, great exegesis right here, and it's really actually interesting just to kind of see him review them.
Okay. That's cool. So I'm setting it up now. I think I won't have us being the same size. I will be small and you will be big. But that's pretty Christ-like or John the Apostle disciple-like. So I think we can all manage that. Just a minute. I figured out how to get better light on my thing. So I don't look white and red at the same time. There we go. Ooh, that's too much.
Ooh, that's like, I have some glare coming from somewhere.
And then one. Oh. Just do this.
That's somewhat better. Oh, nifty.
I looked into the lamp, so I can't tell if it's my eyes are blind. Okay, I'm just gonna pour myself some coffee, and then I'm pretty much ready to go.
Super.
So, this looks decent-ish. Change. Oh, my keyboard is silly. Mason chats.
And I am in my office at the moment. I don't know if like there are probably people coming in and out, and you might get some background noise. So we'll just kind of gauge it as we go. Have you ever? Did I show you our space before?
What's that?
This is like our downtown location, so we've got like an office and then classroom. I'll let you be.
Okay. So, I'm just doing the last thing there. Remove.
So yeah, I'm not like well versed with the Ravi Zacharias thing. I read just kind of like a brief, maybe even just description of the article. It was interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine. This was probably, maybe a month before, I guess, the RZIM confirmed it. And so it was this kind of like baseless claims at this point.
Yeah. Do you just want to wait a little second? Because I think, okay, I'm running now. Yeah.
Okay.
I just figured out what I need to do. I need to have your screen up while we talk for it to be...
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. So now, everything is good to go. And we are running.
Super.
We are live! It's great.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Yes. Good morning, Asheville.
Yeah.
We're so white. We have a podcast and a live stream, and we both have coffee.
We did.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so go ahead while I pour some coffee.
Yeah. So, what was our topic material?
Ravi Zacharias and
Yes.
sexual abuse. Simple topics for a simple cup of coffee.
By the time this coffee is finished, we'll have solved all the world's problems. So.
Or have said a lot of things that shouldn't be said on the internet.
That is something that, with a live stream,
Yeah.
you have to be conscious of. So. Yeah, no. So I was just saying, like, I'm not well like versed or read into the whole thing with Ravi, but it was interesting because I think this was maybe even a month or maybe two time frame kind of gets, I don't know, messed up by the year 2020. So who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine, and I think at this point it was sort of just like baseless claims or accusations that I guess he would go to these massage parlors that he owned or had like stock in, and that's kind of where the first allegations came to light.
Yeah.
Now, if you are more read on that subject, I might defer to you on some things as well. But so I believe what the article stated is there was even maybe some accusations within the ministry as a whole. Is that correct?
I haven't heard about that, but I have heard that people within the ministry have said that they believe these allegations that has been made by people outside of the ministry.
Yes.
Then they have felt like the ministry hasn't properly dealt with it, you know.
Okay.
But I don't know about anything from within.
Yeah, neither do I. So, yeah, I mean, that is just kind of the shocking thing. I guess, I don't know. I feel like just whether it was the fact that it was 2020 or the fact that I think that was probably 2-3 years ago when all of these accusations were just coming to light among various people in very high positions, with like the Me Too movement and so forth, so on. And it was just disturbing, but after a while, I don't know if it was because we got desensitized and it just kind of became less surprising. And so, I don't know, my initial reaction and response is I'm not that surprised, but I am kind of shocked. I'm not surprised when it comes just to human nature and behavior that something like this would occur, but I am shocked that it's somebody like Ravi.
Yeah. I think it would be nice to just go very quickly through what the case actually is, because there's two reasons. One of them is that I personally feel more like this is a case that feels relevant for me, you know?
Yeah.
Because one of like my big things in my life is that I want to do the sort of things that Ravi has done, not in the way that he has done it necessarily, with like speaking and these kind of things, but to me it is obvious that the Christian worldview and the Christian faith belongs in the university, in politics, in the social sphere.
Yeah.
And what we have here is this sort of Me Too thing, with probably the biggest. It's one thing that he is the biggest or one of the biggest Christian apologists, but he is definitely the one with the widest reach to people in power.
Yeah.
So he's probably the single most influential Christian apologist as well. And it's doubly
I guess if
interesting.
we were to say that, if we were to kind of like cast him as like a Billy Graham type, as far as like his scope and sphere of influence, as you just kind of alluded to, then I think we wouldn't be too far off in saying that he did kind of carry that role to a lot of people, from advice and wisdom given, as well as just a great explanation of like Christian ethics and morals and what we actually believe. And yes, I think absolutely need more people that fills that Ravi role of having like public discourse and then just conversation, and then just having like really well thought out answers and responses.
So I think in a lot of these Me Too cases, and it's such an obvious thing to support in the grand scheme of things, and then there are always details that you obviously can't believe every woman in every matter, because matters are different, and you can't. The very basis of the legal system is that you don't judge until the proofs are blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But it's at the same time there is I don't know. You have. I guess I would just say this is one of those cases where it was at first very easy to sort of dismiss it. At least it was for me, because it only the sort of story of sexual allegations with Ravi Zacharias started maybe a couple of years ago, and it was initially only one couple where it was said that the wife had. It was basically a couple that had a similar legal dispute with another minister, another church as well, and it really seemed to me, and it was presented as if they were trying to extort Ravi, basically. And there are a few things that to me were a bit off, like for instance that Ravi was presented as not understanding or being too naive, but he's obviously very intelligent, and he's very he's not a stupid man either, you know. So. But I have this thing that if a lot of cases it's word against word, you know, but I'm reminded of the professor in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and he says that we don't always have all the answers. We don't know if Lucy is right and there is a fairyland behind the closet, or if Edmund is right and it's all just a joke, you know. But out of the two of them, you have a much better track record of trusting Lucy than of trusting Edmund, for instance. It's like, who would make something up to protect themselves? Edmund would. Lucy would, you know. So one of those common sense things is if someone is being repeatedly involved in something that is dubious and you don't know, but it's there's no smoke without fire, you know. So there is a person that I know just tangentially, which a lot of my friends know, who has been involved in similar things, and everyone know that those things really did happen, you know. But I was talking to another mutual friend of me and the person who had done things that he shouldn't have done, and he basically said that I don't go too deeply into this, but when I hear the same things being told from this person and that person, that person, that person, that person, all of these stories have one thing in common. And it's this one person that appears to have done something right. And it's more than enough for him to, who do you trust? Lucy or Edmund, you know? What happened to me was that in this case, the few months after Ravi died, he started becoming that person, not the other way around. It switched from being, oh, these people seem to have a history with this, to being, oh, a lot of people who doesn't, yeah. Suddenly, Ravi became a person that was dubious, and that's when his ministry, the possibly biggest apologetics ministry, hired outsiders to go through it and to go through everything and to be very straightforward and honest in what they found. And then they found clear enough evidence that even Ravis's own daughter, who is one of the heads of the ministry, has gone public and said, yes, he has done these things. And it's one thing with most Me Too things, because to me, I'm like, well, what did you expect? He's Harvey Weinstein, well, what do you expect? He's this politician. We all know they're jerks, but it becomes different in a man whose entire public ministry is built on his character, and when his fault in his ministry, I could have easily ignored it, but I feel like I have much more to learn from going into it. And and that's why I want to talk about this right now. So
and I think I just have some initial thoughts on that too. It's not, like I said, not being overly familiar with the example of Ravi, but just kind of reading some of that. It's so shocking. And I don't know. There's maybe an element of just kind of being. It seems like being in the spotlight really does something to people. Usually not so much in a good sense. And I don't think he was somebody that necessarily craved the spotlight, as oftentimes people do. I think he used it as a platform and knew that he was having an impact, and a positive one, through that. It seems like there is just something about just being in such a public capacity in view that changes people oftentimes for the better, and kind of regardless of who they are sometimes. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what some of the underlying issues are. If it's just oftentimes maybe insecurities kind of are revealed or come to light, and that leads to other things. It seems to be the biggest thing is oftentimes some area of discontentment or insecurity that propels people down this path to where they make really terrible decisions like that.
Yeah. So I think the public pressure is high, and it's not just a public pressure. If you look at people like Jordan Peterson, he stood in more public pressure, but for a very much shorter amount of time. But it just wears people down. Even when it's not criticism, when it's just even positive, you see how many celebrities and actors just completely burn out and go off the rails because it is intense to always be watched and always be judged. And when smoking a joint on the Right or Wrong podcast makes your stocks drop this and this much, and when you're who are your friends and who just wants a piece of the pie and all that things. But I think, to Ravi's credit, he has been open about having struggles with sexual thoughts in his thoughts and in his speakings, and I have thought that he has put it out there in a good way in the past, and sort of not normalized, but the issue of especially sexual sin when it comes to preachers and public speakers and Christians is it is of course not in the least bit acceptable, but many people seem to pretend outwardly like it's not a problem, and then are being eaten away inwardly. And I think it is important that we realize, both for the people who are in those very visible positions, but also in people who are very easily duped into idolizing them. That no, this is a genuine issue, and to me, that is to Ravi's credit, but it is far more to his discredit that this amount of cases that are repeatedly, happening, and not just like, oh, I once made out with a woman I wasn't married to. Oh, I once was traveling for 3 months away from my family and blah 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 blah. But it's like this systematically seems to happen. That is an issue, and it's an issue that Christians have to answer for, because Ravi has been a great inspiration, and you would still be able to put up a lot of his sermons and preachings and say this is very good. And then it is interesting, something that I want to grapple with is how, to what degree do we disown that? What do we disown?
Yeah, and I think that's like a larger conversation too, a topic to cover, because I remember, I guess it was within the last 2 years, you had the, Joshua Harris, the I Kissed Dating Goodbye author, and then I think it was the guy from Hillsong as well that kind of publicly renounced his faith. And that was a big question, kind of what I saw in the Christian world was, these people arguably contributed something and impacted a lot of people in the Christian world. Now that they have, essentially apostatized, do we still find value? Do we still find that their material, their writing for publication should still have an impact on us? Are they still worthwhile, and to what degree because of this? I think it's really kind of a question that answers itself. It seemed like it wasn't the time before we knew these things about them, and it seemed like they weren't yet in that place either. So I would say yes, but then also just again kind of navigating we need to have responses to these types of things, because they're never going to be isolated incidences. They're going to always continue, and as is human nature. And so I think just as the Christian world, we need to have good responses to those things when they happen. They're difficult to respond to.
Yeah. It is one of the oldest, not like schisms, but the oldest dividing debates in the Christian church that goes back to the persecutions and Nero and whoever else persecuted Christians in that time, which was basically, to what degree do we forgive and excuse what should be unforgivable sin, which is basically priests who renounce their faith to avoid getting killed by Nero, for instance. Can they still serve as priests? Can they still administer salvation when they have renounced it? And and there's this doubling thing here, because obviously God's love is great enough, but at the same time, to what degree can you install fallible humans in holy seats?
And that's I think, I've got three thoughts on that. It is such an interesting topic. I mean, my first one, just the initial response is, I think that is why Jesus is called the blameless high priest. And that's why he is referred to as, we have a high priest who intercedes for us and atones us, one that never has sinned himself. And I think that's why it's such an amazing thing. I was, reading Leviticus in the last couple months, and they were talking about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. How there was that one day a year where the Jewish congregation would be purified. And there are all these purification rituals for the people, and then the priest that was doing the purification as well. And if the priest messed up one thing or wasn't purified, gosh, you were in real trouble then. So it's interesting. And then the other two thoughts I had with that is about priests, recanting their faith under persecution. Did you see the movie Silence?
What's that?
with Adam. Did you see the movie called Silence with Adam Driver?
I haven't, but I've been wanting to see it.
Yeah, I think I watched it on the plane the last time I went to India, and it was so fascinating. Yeah, I watched it in segments. Like I think I watched half of it on the way there and half on the way back. It was really just fascinating, and I mean, it's interesting too. It's like produced by Martin Scorsese, and then who himself kind of considers himself like a lapsed Catholic.
Yeah.
But it was dedicated to all the pastors and the missionaries that were persecuted and died under like the shoguns essentially. And it was really interesting because that was the thing of they were trying to get them to recant their faith and they would be spared. And Adam Driver's character is in that position where he needs to do that to save the lives of other people. And so it was really this kind of like moral, ethical question and then the dilemma of that as well. It was really fascinating film.
So, what do you draw away from that film that is applicable here?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact setup there, but essentially the way the film, and this would be a spoiler alert, but the way the film ends is there's, I believe, like several of his traveling companions, and they sneak into Japan to actually find a father in the Jesuit order who had been unheard from in like months. It was played by Liam Neeson. And it's so interesting because I think, when I remember Liam Neeson's character, they end up finding him and he's been like living in like a Buddhist monastery and essentially has kind of embraced the Japanese way of life, yet still has like a little like cross necklace that he kind of just hides and like keeps really close and special to him. And then later on, Adam Driver is given this opportunity to spare his traveling companions who are going to be like executed if he would recant his faith, which he ended up deciding to do. And then later on, I believe he was actually, I don't remember how it is now. Essentially, I think when he dies, he's cremated. I believe he just dies a natural death at the end. So it's, fast forward years, and as they're cremating him, he's got like this little like wooden cross in his hands and stuff. So it was something he always held on to, but it was something that the Japanese just made him do as a public display. So it was more about their power and control than it was about who is the right religion here. I mean, it was also intertwined as well from both aspects. In the Western world, the church was the state of the church.
Yeah.
In the Eastern world, the shogun was the controlling power, and Buddhism was their religion. So it was all like kind of intermixed. So it's really more of a collision of powers than it is about like a spiritual debate. And then you've got this underlying like personal spiritual layer in there, which was fascinating to kind of look at and examine. So that was one of my takeaways.
Yeah, the mixing of church and power, or religion and power, really, is something that comes up a lot in wars that are seen as religious wars. And for me, like Norway is it's very deeply entwined in Norwegian history, that debate. Because a lot of people, even though they might approve in principle of Christianity, believe that Christianity was forced through the sword, basically, in much of Norway. And it's at best a partial truth, in my opinion. It's a big disservice to Christians not to acknowledge that there was force involved, but it is also important to realize that this happened during the right after a period where Norway was being unified as one country, and that time period has an enormous amount of strife. It's basically Game of Thrones, who will sit on the Iron Throne. And Norway is, at that time specifically, a very difficult country to rule from a single throne, because it's the power bases in Norway are far from each other. There's at least three of them. It's the Oslo area, the Bergen area, and Trondheim. And in that time, you would basically need three standing armies or three navies just to control that area. And then there's the inlands, and there are always the Swedes have a natural advantage to attack from the east, and it's basically, it is a serious Game of Thrones thing,
Yeah.
And in that game, So the guy, I think it's called Olaf the Holy or something. He was the guy who went around and like forced people to be Christians. First off, he seems to have had a genuine spiritual conversion in my mind.
Mm.
He seems to have been genuinely convinced that Christianity is the right religion. And then what happens is, in this period of the time, the Catholic Church is the dominant force in Europe. And it is through the Catholic Church that you are pulled into a system of basically education, international communication, science. It's like all these things that you used to be a part of the modern age was within the Catholic Church in Europe at that time. And it is in many ways quite similar to this sort of European Union debate today, like Brexit or not. And it basically means that it's not like, it was that and also politics, but it's you cannot have church and not have politics at this time period, because church in this time period meant the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was the European Union of its time. And then it's people who, and so when he goes around Christianizing Norway, he's actually just going around confirming his rule, but his rule is defined also through Christianity. And
it sounds very similar and not unlike Christianity becoming the state religion in the 300s with Constantine. Which it sounds like much like Olaf. He actually had a genuine spiritual encounter, and it was out of that he decided to essentially Christianize Rome. Again, under kind of threat and persuasion of the sword. So and right or wrong, that's really what did propel the church after hundreds of years of persecution. And I think then we see a lot of problems created further down the road when it comes with the question of church and states and different controlling institutions and powers, and then we see during the Enlightenment as well just a pushback against those powers that be, and then we see a secularization of Europe as a result as well.
Last time we talked, I mentioned that the secular movement of the last few centuries is really just an outgrowth, it seems to me, from Protestantism. And that the Protestants started the whole secularization thing. Does that make sense to you, or do you agree or disagree, or?
I think that I would agree with that. I think it makes sense from what I can gather, just when I see a distaste for religious institution that's so intertwined and inextricably linked to the state and the governing powers, which was the Holy Roman Empire for many years. And it's really fascinating. I mean, you even had the Anabaptists as well, which are kind of coming out of that movement, and that's a really fascinating denomination. I don't write that much enough to expound on it, but what little I have read, seems like some really interesting movements here. I believe they kind of came out of Switzerland in that area, and I can't remember. They may have been contemporaries of the Moravians as well in Czechia, in that area, and how they kind of created a revival there. And that was really fascinating to kind of read this very topically about. But I think the secularization of Europe as a whole, I think must have been spurred and kind of fueled by that Protestantism, where it was essentially just a kind of pulling down of the Catholic monopoly on church and state, which I think was just bound to happen. But we obviously see many great denominations come out of that, but then we also see part of that ramification of it being just the complete distaste to institutional religion, and people kind of now call themselves spiritual, and not religious people, which I always kind of just laugh when I hear that term. I get it, but I'm really?
It's I don't know. It's an easy, non-committing thing. And we love not committing.
Yeah, I think what I've always kind of understood, that could be off base, but what I've always understood by people, what their meaning with that is, well, I'm open to spiritual things and the idea of God, the public figures, and I think it's very individualistic, and I think that's just kind of the way of the world at the moment, especially in the West, is especially in the American setting too, is that rugged individualism, which has led to a lot of creative things and good things, but also a lot of things like we're seeing now, just kind of just, I don't know, lukewarm Christians, and then just secularization as well.
Yes. You know, I went out of the message chat window thing, because in order to like point this back to Ravi, it reminds me that Ravi has a very good reading of G.K. Chesterton. His quote on the New Rebel. You know that one?
Quote some things for me, if you will.
I can start to read it, and you can tell me if you want to stop reading it. But it's so good that I might as well just finish. Goes, but the New Rebel, because G.K. Chesterton is basically, he's a Catholic who's attacking modernity in the 1910s, basically. And to read him, it feels like reading prophecy almost. But he has such a great wit and humor as well, that it's like no one can... it's like... he's philosophically pimp-slapping people, you know?
Yeah.
And I love it. But he writes in everyday man's language. He was a journalist and was like king of the sophists, you know, before he became a Catholic. But I'll read it. It says, "The new rebel is a skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never be truly a revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything really gets in his way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind. And the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. As a politician, he will cry out that war is a waste of life, and then as a philosopher, that life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant, and then prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant should have killed himself. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella, goes on to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern man in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything." And that is like peak secularism, you know?
Yeah.
That is I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, G.K. Chesterton is not somebody I've read lots of, but the little I have, I'm like, man, there's the kind of poignant way he describes things, and like you said, just that everyday terms that people can understand. I think it's so helpful. Which again, kind of going back to Ravi, he did that so well. But yeah, I've read excerpts of like Orthodoxy, and that's just so good. Essentially, he's kind of talking about the post-Christian environment at that time that kind of just seemed amplified as a great. And it's just fascinating to get in there and dissect and kind of hear his take and expounding on it.
It's so interesting to read him because it's like the point he's making are so universally true, but he's so clearly speaking within his time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like reading, I don't know, it's like reading history and philosophy at the same time. You know?
Yeah.
And it's refreshing.
Yeah, which I think to have both of those together just sort of amplifies them each.
Yeah. It is the same reason that I love a lot of C.S. Lewis's essays, because he writes very clearly as a man in the 1940s and 1950s. Yeah. But it's sometimes the point that he makes becomes so much better when you understand that they are made in the 1940s and the 1950s.
Yes, and like you said, universal truths there. That we can very much identify with, but written in, the threat of war looming and hovering over London and England at that time, which is, I think, by and large, what I've read is what people attribute to him being so widely successful, as it was a time where Britain was kind of beginning down that road of post-Christian and post-church culture and society, and most people really had no interest in religion, but they always had an interest for something to cling to and to find meaning and purpose and answers in. And he was somebody that did that so well when they needed it most, when there was confusion and uncertainty, which I think is why, kind of the early days of the global pandemic of which we're in, he became, again, so relevant that people were sharing so many of his quotes and his works because it became even more applicable to the age in which we're living.
True. I was reminded of during Christmas, he has this essay called On Living in the Atomic Age. And it's basically he's answering the question, what should we do, knowing that the nuclear war can start at any moment and kill all of humanity?
Yeah.
To which he says, like, well, actually, if you think about it, we are only now, like, what actually happened is that we fell asleep in the 1900s to 1920s and thought that the world was optimistical and perfect and machines would change everything. But in reality, we are waking up from a short dream into reality that all of humanity has always lived in. Barbarians could land at your shores and cut your throat and plunder your churches at any point in British history, and during entire centuries, the plague would visit London nearly every year, and the fire, like London is burned partially to the ground several times. And he says, like, well, the only thing that the atomic bomb does is reawaken us to the reality that death is inevitable. And as such, we need to, the real question is not how to live with a bomb. The real question is how to live in a completely normal Earth, and I just felt like it is so applicable to the coronavirus in so many ways. He has this quote, sure, the bomb can destroy our bodies, even a microbe can do that, but it need not dominate our minds. If it so finds us, let it find us doing normal things, playing dart, reading, praying, being good humans.
Yeah.
And to me that's the same thing with the virus as well. It's, well, our calling as humans and our moral demands hasn't changed just because we can't go outside or just because we can't go on vacation to Turkey.
Yeah.
So we're still living the human condition, still like human beings under God. And there you have it.
Yeah. There's a great article, I think, kind of early days that I saw too, kind of related, but it was by N.T. Wright, and it was actually featured in Time. And it was essentially like, I should remember the exact title, but essentially it's Christianity does not offer an answer to the coronavirus. It's not intended to. And his, I guess, thing was saying, it was, a lot of people kind of took it the wrong way. A lot of Christians, I think, kind of got upset, like, oh, of course there's an answer. And yes, there is. But I think the answer they're looking for isn't the one that was offered by Scripture and Christianity as a whole. And I think that was the gist of the article, saying that, hey, this is just another blip on the radar in the grand scheme of cataclysmic, apocalyptic type events. And the church really doesn't need to change in the face of that. We just need to continue doing what we've always done. And I think that was kind of the gist and heart of that, which I found refreshing.
I mean, the mother of a good friend of mine got cancer about a year ago, and is doing very well now, thankfully. Another friend of mine, about this time last year, died from cancer, basically, after having struggled with it for years. He was 28 when he died. And like, he is very clearly missed because he's one of two people who were incredible at creating a large youth community, basically, in our church and all that thing. He was like one of those drivers of seeing everyone. They always had an open home. And he was a very blunt, almost rude person, but he is always had time, always open, very pure of heart, even so, And another friend of mine who had a lot of mental issues, actually kind of, I wouldn't say finally, but he committed suicide, which I assume that he would do at some point in his life because he had such enormous issues, basically. And then my question is, why would you need, like, why should the Bible's answer or Christianity's answer to the coronavirus be anything different than the answer to cancer, the answer to suicide? You know, it's the answer is not a solution. The answer is the truth, and the truth is that such is the world we live in, and only God can save us from it.
Yes.
Basically.
And truth isn't always what we want to hear. It doesn't always meet all of our needs, but it is refreshing. It is true for truth's sake. And yeah, I mean, yes, how do you navigate all those questions? Or is it really difficult? I think largely it's based on how Christians navigated that throughout history. What can we learn to take away from it and continue to practice? And I have not been able to find a clip of this interview, but it was so good because it was just a one-liner. And it was, have you ever listened to anything from Brene Brown?
Nah.
She's really popular in the States.
I haven't heard of her.
I think she's a Episcopal. She's a Christian believer in Jesus, and she is actually a researcher, and I believe she's I might be mistaken, but I believe its background is counseling and some degree of psychology, which she has, but she is a shame researcher. So she studies kind of the impacts and effects of shame in humans and kind of the toll it takes on. So she's written a lot of books. She has, I think, a couple like specials on Netflix where she talks about like human dialogue and communication, like relational. She's got this great video on empathy that we actually share kind of when it comes to like relationships and teaching at YWAMer. And it's really powerful. Yeah, well, and she was on Oprah, of all places, and she was talking to Oprah, and she said this one thing. I do not remember the rest of the context, but she said, "And truth is refreshing." I was like, man, wow, I don't know, it's just a very powerful statement.
What's it again? In truth?
Truth is refreshing. It was in response to something else. What's funny is Oprah's kind of person that's always quoted is like, "Live your truth." So I don't remember like in what context it was, but Brene Brown essentially was just talking about, and maybe it alluded to some degree of like kind of the post-truth culture that we're living in, but it's essentially made this comment that truth is refreshing, like because it's just universally true. It is truth. It's something that we can rely and depend on, even if it's not exactly what we want to hear. And that's just kind of always stuck with me, and that's what I always think of when like people dispute truth claims. It's when something is true. You just know because it's refreshing, and it makes things clear.
I think I haven't looked anything into it, but Jordan Peterson has talked about how much, like, if your mind is more or less in the right place, it is really valuable to trust your instincts, because your instinct is basically like I was watching this small rabbit trail, and then I will shoot the rabbit. I saw this video about this was like a little bit of like a snarky, like I'm a guy, women are stupid, that kind of video, but it was quite fun, so I watched it. It's this, the survivor concept. So this there's this programmer, Bear Grylls, or series where Bear Grylls has taught a group of like 16 men and 16 women separately survival skills for 2 days each, and then they are dropped on an island in the tropical island somewhere, and then they have to survive and like manage everything on their own. They get 2 canisters of water, and they get like enough to survive for like 4 or 5 days, but they have to last 6 weeks, And the whole video was basically like, look at, because all the women were like, we're gonna beat the men, and they just like completely collapse, and they make so many bad decisions, and in like 3 days or something, the doctor in the group of the woman is like, she ends up in like getting a heat stroke that is super bad, and she has to be like taken off the island, resuscitated. It's like they would have literally dive the entire group 5 times over because of things that they do. You know, like a water canister gets infected on one of the 2 that they have, and then they throw it away instead of like washing it, boiling it, washing it, and boiling it again. You know.
Yes.
So they just keep, and then they can't get enough fresh water. So it's like there is this medic that like calls them, and they're filming the medic, and he's like, oh, his face is like, you're so stupid, you know. But he's saying like, so okay, what you need to do, my suggestion, if you are to survive, is to go and grab the canister that you have discarded and rinse it and use it. But anyways, how did I get into that one? Drew?
Jordan Peterson.
Yes. Okay. So when he analyzes the men, this is a guy who sort of like analyzes everything that's happening, and he looks at the men, and he says that there are no issues personally between the different men except for one thing that gets pulled out into 3 episodes because that's what they have to work with, and it's basically there's a guy who's very good at fishing, and he fishes food. He fishes most of the food for the group. And he is really angry that this other guy is, he basically found a net washed up on the shore, and he spends days repairing it, and he spends weeks trying to catch fish with it, and he basically doesn't want to do the normal work like everyone else. He believes that this net, if it works, would be amazing. So he spends a couple of weeks on that net, and then finally, and it's so like the guy who fishes, it's like when you, in a survival situation, you need to do 2 things. You need to find out what has worked and repeat that. That's how you survive. But you also need to be creative and try new things and fail a lot of times. And then that's how you explore new things. And then it's like you need to repeat what works, but you need to try new things in order to find what works. And the point that he's making there is that the vast majority of creative people provide nothing to the group. But maybe 8% provide something that is so valuable that even if you need those 92 other percent to be useless, that's what you need in order to get these 8%.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hey, I just wanted to, and I got to jump off here in just a minute, and somebody gave me a call, and I was looking at my battery at the same time. I'm down 2%, so I did not finish it. But yeah, like 15 minutes.
Intuition is basic survival. That's basically what I'm saying. You know, like intuition is how we've gotten this far, and I think that it's interesting to look into whether intuition and this sort of thing that we can't truly explain yet. It's like, do you recognize truth when you see it?
That's really good.
I believe.
Rather than like trying to reinvent the wheel all the time, but like this works.
Yeah.
Let's use a proven and tried method. Which I like why postmodernism is so like self-defeating because it's constantly trying to like reinvent stuff. And it's like, no, we have answers. And then one of my friends I'll talk to, I think he's referenced Orthodoxy by D.H. as well. He's like, most of the questions being asked by like post-church, postmodern philosophers and people, whether it's the comment on the street or whether it's Richard Dawkins, there are questions that have been answered, maybe not in regards to science, but philosophical and questions of church and religion. These have been answered like hundreds of years ago. And people are now just like resurfacing these questions to try to get like a rise out of Christians and try to like, poke holes and things. Like, those aren't even answers to this. We need to be educated. We need to have a good defense. We need to look for like Ravi Zacharias that can expound on that and give your tools that people would be equipped to go and find those answers and articulate from them.
Yes. I don't know. That's why reading Chesterton and reading Lewis almost feels prophetic, because that is where you find a lot of the well-presented answers to questions that are now being given simply because you don't know enough. You know.
Yeah.
It's like if Richard Dawkins actually knew what Christian thinking was, he wouldn't say the things that he's saying. And even Stephen Hawking was guilty of this when he mislabels and misdefines existence and universe and the basic Christian arguments.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is both of them have a pretty good depth of knowledge when it comes to what the Bible says, but only to insulate and reinforce their points, not actually the arguments themselves that Christians in the Bible have been making. But they know those verses that are controversial. You know, those verses that said God commanded, cities and populations to be wiped out, and so that's what they use, but they're not actually reading it in context and the grand story and scheme of things, which is where I think they err the most. But, hey, I gotta run, but I've enjoyed doing this. I might have some time in the next hour, so if we just want to chat some more as well, if you're still free.
I'm here for another hour, but I will probably be chilling and read. But like, give me a message if you want to talk.
Okay.
And then
sounds good.
Yeah. Sweet.
But thanks, man. Always enjoy this, and we'll to continue keeping it going. So.
Keep it real. Oh, that's the west side. What's the east side? East side, brother. East side. Just let it shadow puppetry.
Alright. See you later.
See ya. Blessings. That was fun, eh? A good old talk with your old chap.